Welcome to Return to Form. We now have a visual element. So those of you listening on podcast services can now go onto our YouTube, and if you would rather see our faces during this special presentation on the London Film Festival, which we have been at, go to our YouTube, Return to Form, youtube.com/Return to Form Pod, I believe that's
something like that, yeah.
Maybe incorrect.
Or a string of incoherent numbers and letters, but something like that.
So we've just been at the London Film Festival, which is a kind of second-run festival for Cannes and Venice, and to an extent Berlinale, which we were at. So some of the films that we missed, we might see, and some of the films that we did talk about, we won't talk about here. But let us begin. How's your festival? Are you enjoying it?
Yeah, this is an important question because this is an experiential event, right? So, I mean, the difference is this is our home city. We are, we've kind of gone to ground where we live. So the vibes are different, I feel. Like the sense of esprit de corps, sense of kind of shared, of being the kind of like court press of film. That feels absent now because, I think part of the reason is down to...
We're just getting on the tube.
Just getting on the tube and like trying to fit it around work. And I think one of the strands that feels kind of like very, very important to me is that we've been cast out of the kingdom of God. We've been sent away from the BFI. So the press and industry screenings are all happening at Picturehouse Central, which is Picadilly Circus, which is like not...
A ghastly interior.
Deeply cheugy cinema. Yeah.
Yes, cheugy is the word. A word that I only recently learnt that describes a kind of, I guess, chintzy, crass,
essentially it's all bar one. It's kind of,
so Picturehouse Central looks like all bar one. The actual screening rooms at Picturehouse Central are quite comfortable.
Really nice. Good
decent leg room for Britain.
Yeah.
That's nice.
But it does feel it feels like you're slightly apart. And I think one of the, we're not obviously going into like necessarily institutional critique and event critique here, but like there is a sense in which, the way that the BFI have put on LFF does reflect certain kind of, I suppose, a certain kind of fly in the ointment of the British film establishment, which is that compared to other festivals, Poland included, it feels Kitchina Povera. It feels like it feels like a sort of bit rate village festival or fete rather
than... The village fete. Is it the Kinks? Is the Kinks playing in the Village Green Preservation Society?
No, there's a hurdy-gurdy. There's Kinks. There's like a Kinks tribute act called the Winks or the Pinks or something that are playing. There's no... it feels like there's something missing. But I don't want to get too much in the weeds about how it's been organised and executed and planned.
Well, there's a token system. That's probably what's giving the village
very tokenistic, very typical of the BFI.
We more on that story later. We instead of booking the screenings, we have to go to the delegate's desk half an hour before the screening and collect a little puck, a little yellow or green
like
or red,
kind of poker chip
that you then hand in at the door of the cinema. But you have to queue up half an hour. I suppose they're banking on cancellations and also their website failing, so they thought they'd create a very analog system.
We've gone back. They've basically been bombed back to the Stone Age by their own inefficiency.
Yes. That is an accurate description of the BFI.
And so we've covered the ground of like how it's going down. Like we're not feeling like the vibes yet, but we have begun.
We've seen a lot of films already.
We've seen a lot of films. We've kind of immersed ourselves into that kind of the glittering silver light of cinema. We're being, we're glowing.
We are.
With that. Yeah.
And it's quite a nice day. So, Catherine Breillat is a great director. I think it's fair to say Catherine Breillat.
Supremely good director.
A French director. A woman, but doesn't feel any of the... doesn't seem to please feminist film critics much of the time with her kind of pronouncements. But yes, a real... In a class of her own, I feel, Catherine Breillat. One of my favourite films is En vraie jeune fille, which I'm very glad is being restored at the moment. A kind of coming-of-age erotic film. Yes, because at the moment you can only get it on very dirty, sort of stained... DVDs.
Oh, there's a ripped version. I saw like a really scuzzy ripped version of it. It's good, but it needs
4K
like
restoration is coming.
And we've also obviously got Fat Girl,
Big Bitch,
Amateur, as it's been translated into English.
Amateur, to use the French title. And she made various films.
Bluebeard, we've
Bluebeard,
got
historical drama. She did Romance X, which is kind of like a sort of kink porno almost.
She's a sex person basically.
That's one thing that keeps all of her films. The red thread that runs through all her films is a kind of fixation with the sexual. And last summer, L'été dernier is no exception.
Nice.
She's now in her 80s. And
hasn't made a film since 2003. Since 2013. Yeah. So we've got like a 10-year hiatus.
Years.
She's jumping back on the horse through various personal travails in her life, and she was
hoodwinked. She was conned, and then she made a film about it. Anyway,
which was her last film.
Positive history of Catherine
Isabelle Hubert.
Positive history of the fantastic Catherine Breillat, and her new film last summer is a kind of family romance, shall we say? Tell us a bit about this film.
It's a family romance, as it were, like sort of talk about Irma, but with so it's a golden glossy tale of bourgeois success and contentment and dissatisfaction. The narrative really revolves around a bourgeois couple and the wife. So basically, the husband has a son from a former marriage. This son, who's been playing out at school, now comes home to roost. Basically, so his mum doesn't want anything to do with him anymore because he keeps getting kicked out of school. So it's up to dad to look after it. So he kind of enters this big palatial lawyery. He's like some sort of unspecified corporate, executive or something. Yeah. So he has a lot of money, and it's very, sort of gorgeous, large house. Everything's well oiled.
And she's a kind of girl boss lawyer.
She's a lawyer, who deals specifically, and this is very pointed. She deals specifically with abuse, child law.
The opening scene is her having a very sensitive conversation with a
young girl.
Who's been who she is.
She's interrogating this young girl, so basically
in order that she can adequately defend her against the defense.
Yeah, against the very critical defense that she believes will cast her as a slut and a whore. So what we then get is the introduction of this young boy, this young stud, basically into the...
he's a sort of curly, floppy-head indie boy, isn't he?
He is, but he's been released amongst horses, and so what we have is the introduction of this young boy, obviously with all of these... Are we going to spoil it?
We are now. Here we are. In order to talk in any meaningful way about this film, we have to say that it's about a man who fucks his stepmom.
Yeah, it's a guy that basically relives. It's kind of like a Pornhub category. This guy actually shags his mother-in-law, and it deals with the kind of
stepmom.
Stepmom.
Yeah. Wait, is that the same thing? No, mother-in-law is when you marry someone and the person and the mother of the person you're marrying.
It's stepmom.
So
there's not a blood tie there, but there is an ethical boundary, not only because of the age difference. he's 17 or so, and she's
a delicious Freudian dynamic.
Exactly, yeah. So it's kind of the typical kind of Oedipal complex, if you want to get into
the typical Oedipal.
So we've got typical Oedipal complex, and so an erotic, a romantic, and actually a very erotic relationship. This isn't rutting, and one of the things Catherine Breillat is very good at is shining a light on real erotics, and the real...
her bedroom scenes are often her best scenes.
Yeah. And that's what we felt when we were watching it. I think that the film has this quality. So the sex scenes and the scenes of kind of flirtation and rizzing and the scenes of like everything from kissing to shagging are executed in this beautifully strange, both tender and very, I suppose, so naturalistic that they become quite surreal way. But the wider like cinematography and the way it's shot elsewhere felt kind of sloppy and second rate at times.
So pedestrian that you wonder whether it's a stylistic choice. Like it really looks like an episode of Hollyoaks or something. You remember when when you're a child and your parents are waiting to watch Channel 4 News and there's some scene of someone throwing wine in someone's face, and it's all very long lens. And
for some of us, that was our real lived upbringing.
True.
Not me though, or you. It feels really odd, and it's only when about half an hour into the film when this kind of central transgression takes place and you realize that this is going to be the subject of the film that I guess some of that boringness feels kind of almost okay, because you're like, well,
what it's lacking in formal transgression, it's certainly making up for in content. And it's genuinely
it's
like
shot with this kind of roving camera that sometimes was a little bit. The rovingness is fine, but I was trying to understand what the roving was establishing. Because a film typically like this,
aimless roving and weird, like washed out color, like it's like they just didn't expose it correctly.
Yeah, the exposure was a bit strange. But and when we get to these sex scenes, suddenly the blocking is really interesting because I think it's really what Catherine Breillat cares about is sex. It's the plot. Everything else is basically an excuse to get to.
And the sex scenes are long. They're like one take usually, continuous take rather than back and forth. I mean, you can't really do back and forth sex because it's next to each other. But there's
the real shot, reverse shot.
Maybe that's the reason she didn't do it. But like, it does have this amazing. This sense of duration suddenly enters the room where it normally doesn't in this film. Which is strange because I think her earlier work, her best work, has some sense of deliberateness and control. Regardless of whether it's sex. I suppose even in Fat Girl, the most interesting scenes are the sexual
scenes.
And
it often sometimes shot, there's a slight rovingness to them, but sometimes shot with a kind of static camera. There's something kind of Christian Petzoldian, I should say just Petzoldian about earlier cinema.
If you're wondering what the hell do we mean by Christian Petzoldian, we did a whole episode with friend of the show George Macbeth on Christian Petzold, the German filmmaker. Carry on. Yeah,
there's a similar tendency to treat sort of charged scenes of a particular kind of fixed frame or whatever, yada yada yada, that might kind of pan a little bit left and right. But with this, the actual blocking of these sex scenes is really interesting. The first kiss that they share is beautifully weird and seedy. We actually see the kiss very, very close up. The camera's right here, and we can kind of glimpse he's watching like some sort of anime on his mobile phone.
Mobile telephone.
And you can kind of see that kind of glimpsing in between their lips. There's the second kiss, so there's interesting mirroring in this film. There's a later kiss, which is much more fraught and intense because he actually falls for this woman. He falls for a stepmom because it's not his first sexual encounter, but it might be his first sort of meaningful, in a strange way, sexual encounter. And there he's drunk, she's sober, and it's this very desperate, sloppy, wet Frenchie, basically, and it's incredibly well shot. And there's two sex scenes. The first time we only see his face, really. We see a bit of her hair, and the second time we only see her face. So she's taking quite deliberate aesthetic and compositional strategies in how she represents.
It's tightly wound with all these like scenes of people not saying things or people trying to stop other people saying things. There's a lot of the film is spent in the sort of legalistic space of what can and can't be said, and it twists and turns in a genuinely exciting and unpredictable way. It does have that. It would be a good film to compare with Memory by Michel Franco, which we'll talk about hopefully in the next episode, which is also LFF. But it uses the transgression as a material in a very engaging way,
and finds a kind of interesting and novel way to depict it, and also finds a kind of shocking way to represent it, which is like, other filmmakers might choose to represent this transgression purely in an aggressive and sort of judgmental and condemning way. And she's removing her judgment from it and actually exploring the tenderness and the passion between these two people, kind of vacuuming out the ethical and legal considerations. The ethical and legal considerations sit around the film. They're the fat on the bone. Those, and we see these, obviously she's a lawyer, there's a duty of care, there's a kind of professional boundary she's crossed. But Catherine Breillat does a great job of just removing those things during the scenes themselves, and they're really tender and quite powerful scenes of eroticism and sex that I hate to say things like this, but no one's really doing it like that. When we saw, Emily Attef's film last year, which had these really overdone hyperdrive scenes. It dealt with a similar subject matter, which was an age-different sexual relationship. But there,
being kept a secret.
But there, she was approaching. It was almost, the critique of young. It was
sentimental and overdone. Whereas I think actually maybe this is the secret, at least behind her sex scenes. Is this kind of like very bare approach that allows you to kind of fill in the gaps, not with your imagination necessarily, because they're sometimes somewhat explicit, but like they don't overcode what you're watching, which I think is really important with Breillat. And it ultimately leaves you with this, like all good Breillat films, you leave the cinema feeling like you've woken up from a sex dream that you're not sure you should have had. It has a sort of weird, like a cuddling, but real sense of unease.
Yeah, it kind of takes I suppose the erotic into these interesting places, which is like where it should really exist. Is where they thrive, which is in this the real transgression is not the age difference or the relationship between them. It's actually the kind of way in which that relationship is brought to life and is actually shot, framed, blocked. I think really interesting. So, but
it's only shot, framed, and blocked well
during sex
3 times.
Yeah. So put aside the rest of the film, and there's some annoying kind of like bits of like non-diegetic music that kind of slip in, which is a common refrain for us, where people just slap a bit of music into a film just to add something, which
it's weirdly normie and then suddenly not normie at all. And I think that's that's actually something you can see in some of Breillat's other work. But it did surprise me that it lacked a certain kind of construction that I expect from her work. But maybe that's symptomatic of where we're at. I think we're going to say this a lot with a lot of the directors we're talking about this festival, is that they're actually making films in a less interesting way than they did 10 years ago in terms of the actual like visual material.
Yeah. But there's still real worth there, and I still would recommend people to see it, because it's like, not only like Breillat completionist, but like, it's an interesting story, and it's like
it's better than Bluebeard, I think. Yeah, it's definitely like definitely a good Breillat film, a decent Breillat film. Moving on, let's do the shorts. Let's
okay, because my memory has turned to paste over some of these.
Don't worry, I will refresh your memory.
If you run through them, I can kind of I'll see if any neurons fire about these. We watched them in one kind of long clump.
So we got a bit I got a bit plastered, somewhat more plastered than we are now. And watched on the viewing library, important delegates like us who've paid our £52 have access to an online library of mostly short films, but some features, including the Breillat, weirdly, even though it's quite a high-profile release, in my opinion, although it might not get distribution. I'm not sure about that. But they have a lot of shorts that are being shown as part of the London Film Festival. The majority of these shorts that we watched were British, and the vast majority of them were funded by BFI Network, which is basically the only way you can get funding in the UK to make a short, and the only way you can really
like state institutional funding.
And the only way, the only way but it's this BFI are the gatekeepers for almost all that funding. And the only way to make a feature, obviously, is if you have some kind of track record as a short filmmaker, or, as I'm fond of saying, a good British film is only made when someone very eccentric receives a significant inheritance. Park that though. The shorts. Let's talk about the shorts. Let's talk about what the BFI believes are the cutting edge of grassroots, homegrown filmmaking talent. We have Mother of Mine. I'm not going to remember the directors of any of these films. It doesn't matter. Mother of Mine, which is a film starring Robert Webb about a man whose wife dies, and then he decides to not tell his daughter. And there are lots of various pale, desaturated shots of him looking
extremely miserable. So it's like a kind of creme caramel of a film. So it sort of looks like your nan's sofa from the 70s. It's I found this, it was pulling a lever, which is miserabilism. It's shot in this kind of like, the house he's in is this kind of miserable London semi-detached. He's got this
Jez from Peep Show. With less hair, looking permanently depressed.
And looking like kind of gaunt and a bit faded, because the whole film is kind of gaunt and faded.
But of course, he's just lost his wife, so sure, he should be sad. But it's an insanely manipulative film that gives you no depth or insight into like what the characters are actually feeling.
The real process of grieving, which I don't know what it is, but I think there's lots of things where we have these cutaways to items that she
she received a boohoo package that she ordered, that obviously she's
boohoo
dead.
Indeed. But we get a photo of like a hairbrush with some of her hair on it, and like, I don't know, even like a bathroom items in the toilet or whatever and stuff like that. And it's like the camera suddenly switches and gives us these kind of like item shots of these things. And
and no doubt objects
track his eye. Yeah, objects are kind of
important in storytelling, but it's just so pat and so formulaic.
Chekhov's boohoo package.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there's
let's move on.
Yeah.
There's a film called The Walk, which stars Adil Akhtar, who was in
Four Lions.
He was on Four Lions. He played probably the least well-equipped terrorist in Four Lions, Faisal. This is a film about a man. This almost sounds like a joke. This is the synopsis for this film. a man who has to walk 24 miles a day to get to the job centre.
Which for all the faults of the Conservative administration, I can't imagine that is true
miles.
in any.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And anyway, as you'd expect, it's a very, again, like Mother of Mine, it's a very low energy, miserablist affair. It is shot in a slightly more exciting way.
The editing is a bit more jumpy because it's trying to, because this guy's got like schizophrenia or something, so it's trying to represent the interiority of a character who's going through some sort of form of psychosis. But it has a lot of, it does it in a so it does it in a sort of, there's a sort of like, I'm so crazy. It's like, it's this sort of joker-pilled attempt to represent.
Yeah, and he does kind of lose it at the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's again very manipulative. Making some kind of pathetic, impotent protest at the Conservative government, using money raised by the government, which that would
Master's tools,
which would be fine, I guess, if you. But it just doesn't even say anything interesting. I don't want films in this country to be propaganda. I particularly don't want them to be very, very bad propaganda, which is what this is. It's
saying something that we know is true, that it sucks to have like severe mental health problems, and it's bad to have to walk in theory 24 miles to go to a job centre, which might sort of slap you over the wrist for
I would
missed
walk
appointment.
24 miles.
That was in my head.
Just to be at the job centre. Yeah. And obviously at the job centre he gets completely parred off and ignored, and it's like condensed Ken Loach, Daniel Blake bullshit.
Yes, exactly.
Strangers.
It's the kitchen sink, the sort of kitchen sink representing itself again twice. So we've had two kitchen sinks already.
Get ready for more. This one, Strangers, should sort of be seen slightly on its own because it was not funded by the BFI.
No, it was independently funded.
Independently was funded. I don't imagine it cost very much. It has quite an arresting opening shot of a sort of dog and then a dog walker entering a field that has electricity pylons in it.
Yeah.
But we are going to launch a bit of a pylon onto this film, I'm afraid, because the acting was quite bad.
Very wooden.
The concept of her walking her dog, and the guy, he's lost his dog, and then he tells this sort of story about.
Do you believe me? Do you think I'm telling the truth?
So maybe it's Brexit related.
He's actually Romanian.
He's Romanian, okay.
But he's very German coded, I would say.
Yeah. He's giving German. But his dog, he's lost his dog, and then he tells a story about finding the corpse of a young boy in the field. It didn't impress upon us what the hell it was meant to say or do. After the first shot that I quite liked, it became visually very boring. Shot reverse.
It was also kind of like in this really kind of over like this really like high contrast greyish colour that then had this vignette effect around.
Yeah, it almost seemed like an error or something. Oh, there was one wide shot that was clearly just there because they hadn't picked up the dialogue properly, so they just had like this like whenever they presumably didn't have a decent enough shot nearer to the actors, they just had this wide shot where you couldn't see what they were saying. That was just, and then they just played the dialogue. Boring. It was really bad. It felt like this kind of almost this riddle me this film in a way. It's just like here's like an ethical conundrum. It's like I don't understand. It was very woodenly written. So from the very small, bearing in mind most of these are BFI funded that they're selecting for the BFI London Film Festival. It's fair to say these BFI funded films won't really get shown anywhere else. So they kind of have to be shown at the London Film Festival. Yeah. So that leaves a very small amount of space for British films that aren't BFI funded in the shorts program. And they've chosen quite a bad film, so that's a shame. There must be, I know there are better short films being made every year than this film. Area Boy, which is about a bunch of young black kids in London, I believe. And there's a sort of a kind of
religious conversion narrative.
No, I think that's a different film. No, it's an outcast.
There's so many of these films.
There's a guy who's a bit of an outcast. Who sort of doesn't seem to fit in. Various scenes of him trying to kind of ingratiate himself on this general crowd of area boys.
And he's super religious. He's kind of like, or he's in part of a church.
Oh, yes.
And he's about to have his baptism.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course, because the end scene with the baptism. But more importantly, suddenly halfway through, you realise he likes putting lipstick on. So there's a trans narrative there. So it doesn't really...
It makes the film. It basically makes the film subservient to the kind of identity politics. And I'm not trying to get over Lawrence Fox here, but it makes the film subservient to its.
God forbid.
God forbid, of course. But it makes the film subservient to satisfying or servicing like a particular ideological framework.
Yes, and we
so making it not a film. It is not a film. It is again, as it were, propaganda on a different range, I think.
Yeah, and then right at the end, one of the kids sort of tells him that, tells him in a very roundabout way that it doesn't matter if he wants to experiment or something. So the plot basically hinges on whether this community of black guys are going to accept
this young
guy who.
And the more interesting one is maybe people wouldn't be that understanding, but because the film has to be palatable, of course his mate has to actually, going from a position of being really oppositional to him, suddenly relate to him and be really understanding. Suddenly, be really understanding. Sort of again, it's servicing a particular kind of, I suppose, liberal fantasy of
like, they're good after
this
all.
Rosy, this kind of a rosy unveil of ignorance.
That's the twist. The twist is like, you don't have to be racist because actually they're not homophobic.
Yeah.
After all, very just pathetic. Anyone who actually knows about politics would just see this and laugh. Like it's like people who don't know anything about politics attempting to do politics because now everything has to be political.
Political and palatable.
And palatable, yes, and sort of making you think. Most filmmakers you meet, or most people in the industry you meet, think these sorts of films are bad, but they just keep being made because of some kind of strange bureaucratic blockage. I would assume. I don't know.
Yeah.
Clearly, someone thinks they're clever. Essex Girls, which is about a young black girl in about 10 years ago. Everyone's got Blackberries in school. And she normally hangs out with these white girls in Essex, where the school is. And the white girls are sort of asking her if she's going to go to the party tonight. And she's like, oh, I'm not sure. And they're saying, oh, Mark really likes you. Oh, I'm not sure. I don't know if he's called Mark. But anyway, there's a guy that she doesn't think that this white guy likes him because she's black. Then during an incident of extreme racism from the balding geography teacher.
Very pointed, over-exaggerated racism. Where you lot are from is pretty much what he says.
He's like, explains, like, so basically none of the kids are really paying much attention. And then he says, we're talking about migration, which is why you lot came over here.
It's like, who knows what migration is?
So yes, the white working class don't get a good rap in this. But so it's just and then these two, there's a fish out of element. These two black girls sort of both both notice this form of racism to the teacher, both stick up for themselves and are punished for it. And in their moment of punishment, the detention or whatever, they then bond. And at the last minute, she's supposed to go out with the white people on a Friday night. She decides to go to London with her black friend and meets loads of a party full of black people. And there's a very handsome black guy who seduces her. Then they change her hairstyle, and she loves her new hairstyle. And then the next,
even though she's a literal schoolgirl, can we point out that little bit of narrative? He looks like a strapping young man.
Age gap, discourse on discourse here. Because you've got to be.
But it doesn't problematize that. No. I mean, this is, I suppose. These are not films again. These are exercises in satisfying a particular kind of expression of the liberal imagination. Nothing more than that.
Absolutely.
There was very little, particularly with that film, like Area Boy. Though it was competently, the cinematography was quite competent, and it was a solidly shot, like a good quality sort of BBC drama or something. Maybe better than that. Whereas Essex Girls was shot very indifferently.
I think what most upset me about Essex Girl was just the fact that its central premise was stick to your own. Its central premise was
segregation narrative.
You'll never be understood by someone of a different race, so you should just. I don't think I'm being too extreme in saying that was obviously people of different experiences.
That was the takeaway.
Yeah, obviously people with different experiences are going to bond. Going to have different things to bond over. But it was certain, maybe just because it was a short film. I don't know, but it didn't explore any other complexities or contradictions in the bonding. It was just very basically she should be hanging out with
her own,
with people who look like her, who have experienced racism in the same way that she has. So, and again, it's not really a learning experience for anyone, and not really suggest. It's just not film.
No, it's not film. It's not filmy. This is this thing we often talk about. And we often invoke the nature of it. It's like truthiness. This is filminess, and there is a certain filminess to film, which is something that tells a story by sort of bootstrapping narrative and the formal qualities of film together. The best films do that. They are a visual medium. This is where someone like Shklovsky is really incorrect, because Shklovsky was like, he said that film had superseded literature by, basically doing literature better. And it's like, that's not true at all. It's a very distinct, unique medium that exists in its own right. I think it's frustrating to see, I suppose, funding is bitter fruit here, I suppose, but we're seeing, funding go towards films that seem most indifferent about it. It's just a story that happens to be caught on camera. Yeah. And that's not a film. That is not a film. That is just a story. That is just an ideological point. If these films took kind of, I suppose, more daring, formal, how can you tell a story? How do it's really basic media study stuff. How do you communicate a character's isolation or alienation? Maybe shoot them from a wider distance, maybe frame it differently, maybe take different formal strategies to approach that story. But none of that is just shot like any old. They're shot like any old.
None of that is
Netflix
really noticeable.
drama.
When they do something unusual, it's usually very traditional in terms of the mise en scène. Two more horrendous short films to discuss.
I can't even remember them.
South Facing, which is about a young black girl in London whose mother's rice and peas Caribbean food business was shut down because of a trendy flat white third wave coffee place, and she decides to, and the person running the third wave sort of like forced her out of business with lots.
And she's a bit of a bitch.
And she's a bit of a bitch.
There's a confrontation. Yeah,
there's a confrontation. Her and her boyfriend pretend to be documentary makers and interview this horrible white woman who's just a total bitch, and confront her on her being a total bitch, and then she's kind of a bitch to them. And then they go home to the protagonist's mum, who is just extremely generous about the whole thing and says, "This isn't the way to, thank you."
It's just a moral lesson. It's just,
So once again, there are good people and there are bad people, and we won't learn anything else about them. And that,
very binary. It's extremely binary.
That goodness and badness, the way it's arranged, will satisfy.
It was well acted. I thought that was well acted, that film, actually, in fairness to it. The two kids were like really good in it, I thought. But.
And then the last film, which I'm proud to say. Why am I proud to say it?
I'm proud to say it.
It was the worst.
Are we counting this amongst? Are we talking about? Haar?
We're talking about no. We're talking about The Singer. You forgot about The Singer, the Glaswegian busker film.
Oh my
with the
god!
Deaf guy.
Yes.
This is so incredible.
Okay, I feel like there's something about The Singer. So this was actually funded by
Screen Scotland, right?
Screen Scotch Egg or whatever it is, like this, the BFI
Short Circuit.
Short Circuit, that's it.
The Scottish equivalent of the BFI.
The Scottish equivalent of the BFI.
Quite dark. Should we get a light on?
We're talking earlier about the problems of overexposure. Now we're talking about problems of underexposing. As seen, here we go. That's better. So basically the kindest thing I can say about this is it would have made a great Vodafone advert. These kind of again very together
connection.
It's about a sort of slightly mopey sad boy busker and in Glasgow, and which is bad enough. He's sad, but he's also in Glasgow, and there's also a deaf guy who loves music, and they connect over music, and there's a kind of this deaf guy's a bit kind of strange, and he's a bit of a weirdo, right?
It starts off with the busker being
robbed. Actually, he's
robbed in the street. Yes,
good.
Because his music is awful and horrible to listen to. That doesn't mean he deserves to be robbed, but
no.
It was very bad music, and someone plays a cruel trick on him, and then the deaf guy tries to sort of intervene, is misunderstood as also being part of the mob, and then they kind of form this unlikely bond. And obviously he expresses his love for the music in a different kind of way than someone who has perfect hearing. But it just bangs on and on and on for 19 minutes in the most ugly way. I mean, you can just see like loads of adverts in the background of the shots. It just has no sense of like isolating things to look nicer.
No, the blocking and the actual composition and blocking is so indifferent.
So horrible and ugly. The characters are just they are being pitied in the form of the film, that they are the subject of pity, not intrigue.
There's no
what
real
else did I hate
ambiguities
about this?
I think there was something
just pathetic.
The actual music itself that they bond over was terrible. Like these drawly, it's like the kind of music they play in a Starbucks at Christmas. Like these songs that they're kind of uniting over. they go home to the deaf guy's flat.
Yes.
And end up like bonding over. He can feel the reverberations of the music through his feet.
Yeah, but they don't even have gay sex. They don't even have like a.
It does set it up.
There's not even a there's a suggestion of a romantic connection, but it doesn't even.
No, it's just friendship.
They just sort of like hang out and like console each other somehow. But then he like leaves in the morning before
because he's woken up in some strange guy's flat.
Yeah.
I need to get the fuck out of here.
And then like they do it, and then he's like a bit awkward when the deaf guy returns. But then they do this like duet, and they're like friends again. I mean, who is watching these films and thinking, especially this film, which was particularly bad, who is watching these films and thinking, oh, that's so true. Like these people have worms for brains. This film was disgusting. This film was disgustingly sentimental. It was visually ugly, and it told me nothing. And it looks like an advert. It literally looked like an advert. It also had the truth content of an advert. It was
it had this very
of
commercial kind of like, it was so boiled down to it's selling its message that it ended up just selling something. It was it's selling nothing in the process because it was constructed like
they could have made some money. Vodafone could have paid for it, and it might have made the people involved a bit more money.
I mean, again, it was just a pure exercise. It felt like a kind of didactic exercise. It was very deeply didactic exercise and about understanding through difference and friendship and coming together. But again, that is not film. That's an instructional video. I expect that from a sort of local authorities video about how to take out the correct recycling bins. That's what it was. That was the register of this film, and this is surely.
And it doesn't work. It preaches to the converted. Anyone who finds this,
no one's watching this and going, "Oh my god, actually, yeah, deaf people are people."
I just realised I should be nice to deaf people, and I shouldn't like assault and rob buskers in the street. Thank you, BFI, for showing me that.
Maybe the people of Scotland do need to hear these messages. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it was really laughable.
To conclude, we've run the gamut of some pretty horrendous short films, and these films are supposed to be
pick of the crop.
The pick of the crop in some sense. They have been selected, at least at the funding stage. And it's a crying shame. And anyone in the film industry knows someone who's applied for this sort of money and not got it.
Yeah, our hands are extended.
And exactly like the busker.
And we've been mugged by the BFI.
It's maybe because of the Conservative government, a small pot or whatever. But
I think it's a small pot and increasingly shrinking pot.
A small and increasingly shrinking pot, being increasingly poorly apportioned.
But we should, now move on to. I want to say better things. We are moving on to better things in some senses, but we have to kind of dodge through the narrows of something that's a little bit less high quality, which is we have to go through.
Haar.
To bring this back, we watched Haar, Haar, which is a British sort of somewhere between a short and a feature film. It's sort of 80 minutes long film starring Kate Reynolds. That's just
I can't remember the name of the actors.
So basically, this film concerns a sort of unit production manager. This is another film about a someone involved in the film industry.
Yeah. Write about what you know.
Who is sort of temporarily stranded in Budapest due to a closed airport.
Because of COVID? No, closed airport.
No, some other issue that's kind of not explained. And during this kind of stay, she receives some sort of tragic news about the death of her father, and also has a series of kind of like ambiguous encounters with people who are new and people who she doesn't know. And the crucial thing, the difference is on the kind of like the Mark Jenkin effect is that it's shot on Super 8. It's shot on Kodak Super 8 films. So my concern always with the, I guess, aesthetic decision and a formal decision to shoot and film.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a lot that has been done with film historically, like most film that has been shot, or sort of like most of the years in which film has been shot was shot on film, varying qualities of varying registers on everything from a Lumiere Cinecam up to sort of like 35mm. It is you're making a particular kind of decision. You're making a particular statement by choosing to shoot on Super 8, which is a lightweight handheld format, which is capable, as actually Mark Jenkin does, acknowledge and express, is capable of being exposed interestingly, is capable of being pushed to interesting places in terms of lens flare. And
exactly. It's more vulnerable to sort of light leaks and scratches. I mean, generally, the lower the gauge of film, the more it looks like film, like the more it's unavoidably.
So Super 8, you're filmist. And the thing was, this is shot in such lustrous Kodak and in such a kind of normative way on tripod, often just panning around, that any benefits that might have accrued from shooting on film were lost, because what you've really got is you've got a digital film that looks like it's had a kind of film filter effect put over the top.
Yeah,
so it felt like it nullified itself.
It doesn't justify itself.
No, it doesn't.
And this technique is more or less the same technique that you get in Mark Jenkins' Bait, which, for all the rude things we say about Mark Jenkins, I think was quite a good film, and a kind of a very exciting debut.
A very good film.
And yes, it uses this technique of putting the sound in afterwards, but it absolutely.
He uses that. So he shoots
in
kind of this quite high contrast black and white. He shoots with like real depth. So for Mark Jenkins, the kind of as it were, the silent partner of that film is the sea, because it's shot on the coast, and the sea is always something we see in Bait in this kind of washy Jean Epstein style blur in the distance. It's really kind of enthralling and kind of sublime in a way, whereas this, you're not really getting it, because it just looks like a sort of like nice picture postcard of Budapest. Most of it's shot kind of medium and sometimes in close up.
Who's this guy Ben Hecking? So he's a
DOP.
He's a DOP, but he has directed
shooting films.
He has directed a few sort of video on demand rom-coms, it seems,
something like that.
But yes, it feels a bit like a kind of film made between other films, a kind of passion project. It doesn't, unlike the film we were just talking about, it doesn't look like a Vodafone advert.
And yet there are phones in it,
and that there are quite sort of funny sort of super 8 shots of people using iPhones. But yes, it has a thanks to Joanna Hogg at the end. So it's from a certain stable, I would imagine. Although it has none of the skill of Joanna Hogg's work. It was
like a perfectly fine. It was finely written, and I think Kate Reynolds is very good in the role as this kind of protagonist who's going through this, sort of personal trauma. There's a very sexy scene, I suppose, which is, throughout she acts very competently and interestingly, but I think it does a disservice to itself by having this ADR. It does a disservice to itself by choosing to shoot in film, which ends up being a distraction from, and it basically gives it an out on having to make any formal interesting compositional decisions, because it's saying, oh well, it's in film, so it's interesting formally, and it's not interesting because it's shot in film, because it didn't need that. It felt like,
but the thing is,
it's such an agile format to shoot in. This is a tiny camera that's about this big, it weighs about less than a bag of sugar, right? And it's like, it's something that Jonas Mekas used. Jonas Mekas would dance with his camera. This is something that's so super supple, and it's super pliable to capture footage, to skip frames, to jump, to jolt, to particularly when the film is really about this woman's interiority and her feeling like she's kind of acting weird around various people that she has to interact with. Her
interiority is entirely unexplored, and it may not be the actor's fault, but it does absolutely lack any kind of
The film is just interested in like these comedy of manners, like, no one knows that her dad's just died, so she's acting kind of weird at a party, and then she's a bit distant when she meets a former colleague, and someone's a bit nice to her and gives her a sandwich. So we see these kind of these exterior kind of expressions of interiority. But the point with something like Super 8 is that's the instrument to explore the strange perspectival distortions.
But you're also not really taken on a journey. I mean, every scene is just so flat. But I do want to say about this Super 8 thing. I mean, why did we even watch this film, right? Because it was shot on Super 8. Because it's sort of in the program, amidst a long line of other, we get emails as delegates. We receive emails every day from desperate producers and sales agents saying, you must come and see this film, and
you can really make a difference.
It's invariably, almost by definition, not a film we actually are seeking out, because it's not by an established director. And so, they're saying, they're sort of trying to entice us with, maybe a minor star or whatever. or trying to ask if we want to interview the director, and these are not personalized messages. They don't know who we are either. This is a mutual lack of
a veil of ignorance,
excitement. But yes, regrettably, our emails have been added to some list, and we hear about all these films. And this was the only film that we are reviewing that we also were kind of
neophytes to. This was unknown to us.
That we were actually kind of that exists within that category of LFF film that just is like being like hopelessly hawked. And yeah, it stood out to us. Why? Because I suppose because it's British and we sort of want to see what a low budget British indie feature looks like, and also because it's this 16mm has this quality in the industry of marking something out, making people think, oh, it might actually look kind of interesting or be kind of interesting. Sadly not. And also weirdly, they seem to have spent the whole budget on like quite expensive music choices. It starts with Future Islands. I mean, maybe this person just has a deal or they're just winging it, but weird, like bad aesthetically to
very
start with that song.
Well, when your whole point of your film is to have these kind of this separation between the lived reality of what is shot and this ADR music, to then have this other, it's unintentionally alienating to then just pump in a bit of, it's very Channel 4 drama in a way. It's sort of, we'll just drop in a bit of kind of vibey millennial music to kind of set the scene. It felt unconsidered. It didn't need that music. It was, I think, any opportunity to estrange the experience. And she's going through a deeply, as it were, once in a lifetime experience, which is a parent dying. More than once in a lifetime, twice in a lifetime, maybe. But you know what I mean. It's a very extremely uncommon experience. Lots of, she's put in situations where the opportunities for estrangement are presented, but we only really get that level of the script, which is her acting a bit weird around people. Even when she kind of spins out a bit, the camera really doesn't do anything differently. It just kind of, there's a few cuts and the editing kind of paces up, so we get a few slices into the shot and we see her from a few different angles, whereas the rest of the time it's been a little bit shot reverse shot.
Would have actually been a decent short, maybe.
I think it feels like a short that was padded, because at the end we get these two very over-mannerized monologues by these characters. She has this understanding with this guy, and she talks about her dead dad, and he talks about him being a bit of a shit dad to his young daughter. But these monologues felt so manicured and preened to sound deep and meaningful, and kind of like street wisdom in a way, that it just felt, and they occupied the last 20 minutes of this film, so it did feel like a much shorter film that was then sort of
it's really pushing that 80-minute mark. It feels like it just got over the line.
I didn't love it. I thought Kate Reynolds' performance was really good. I didn't feel that the film was justified, and when you make a film in this format, it's really jumping up and down, going, "Hey, I'm shot in this technique," and so do something with it, do something interesting with it. Surprising that he's allegedly a cinematographer, a DOP, because it didn't feel like the hand of a DOP behind it, apart from the technical, know-how. I'm sure there's a lot of technical know-how how to use this ably in the field, but it was too pristine.
It wasn't Greg Toland. It had no compositional flair whatsoever.
It was basically like using it's like using a hacksaw to carve an ice sculpture, right? It's uninteresting,
crude.
So this thing, because what the result is something that just looks very nice, and like I said, it looks like someone's just stuck an Adobe filter, like old film effect filter over a digital film.
It doesn't look nice in any way other than the fact that Super 8 looks nice, and it's not actually. We're now discovering. After the heady excitement of the BFI London Film Festival, which we love, we are also discovering that it's not enough. You can't just shot stuff on film. You actually have to. It seems like an obvious thing to say, but you actually have to shoot an interesting shot, and the characters have to have rich interior worlds. Speaking of interior worlds, I am now going to review Priscilla,
which I did not see,
by Sofia Coppola, which feels like an important film to review.
Real Nepo baby hours.
Yeah, well, I think she sort of transcended Nepo.
That's a joke. Nepo. She's a great director. Always historically been a great director.
Historically been a great director. This film, unfortunately, did not excite me at all. It is a kind of endorsed by Priscilla Presley. She's the executive producer. It is a film about the gilded cage scenario that Priscilla Presley found herself in early on in life. It wanders around various pontifications around grooming, I guess, because she was sort of selected out of a crowd by Presley in West Germany while he was on military service. And Jacob Elordi plays Elvis very unconvincingly. Someone I saw it with afterwards said that, like Austin Butler in Baz Luhrmann's recent Elvis, he simply was too skinny to play Elvis, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it was always a bit of a fat.
Yeah, we should have lent into that a bit more. But whatever it is, I mean, the paradox of this is you don't want to make a film about Elvis. You want to make a film about the person who was kind of like entranced by Elvis, and yet in order to make that film, you actually have to make Elvis entrancing. You have to sort of see what she sees.
The magnetism of,
and you do see quite a lot of him. You actually see more of him than I think the film should probably show, given that it's about someone who spent a lot of time not with the person they were in love with. I mean, he goes on these various jaunts.
The daring film shoots doesn't have him at all.
That could be interesting. Yeah, Priscilla just Jean Dielmaning at home basically would be more interesting. This is made further like ridiculous by this ridiculous scene, this absurd liberal sop at the end where she's finally decided to leave Graceland, and she greets she says farewell to the help, an old elderly black servant, and the grandmother of Elvis, who's also kind of basically a servant, and another woman who's just like a secretary or something, and she sort of gives them a warm hug, and it's like, oh, these ladies understand the labor, the emotional labor, and it's like, well, you never talk to these women. I mean, there's no, apart from the occasional knowing glance, you must have spent an awful lot of time talking to these women, but the script didn't.
But they're not forwarded; they're just kind of instrumentalized at the end.
Exactly.
This kind of gracious, let them eat cake.
Exactly.
Moment,
good callback to Marie
Thank you. That was intentional. But the thing is, like I said when I was talking to you, I mean, I didn't see Priscilla, but there was a moment at the turn of the millennium when Sofia Coppola has this glorious triple jump of films.
Yes.
Including Virgin Suicides and so on, which were lost in translation, and she was
genuinely weird subjects of films.
Strange subjects,
like unsettling.
Ambivalent.
This isn't weird. This film.
Ambiguous, but also really, really, really kind of pissed on the third rail of the zeitgeist. These films kind of embodied a particular kind of. They were like pre-amplification for nostalgia at a time when the nostalgia hadn't yet arrived for that period. They kind of define that transition into the new millennium really interestingly. And Marie Antoinette included. In their own way, they were all sexy and strange and unusual and had interesting subject matter and explored kind of power dynamics in interesting ways. So yeah, it's kind of a shame to then kind of retreat into the safe cocoon of like an easy to tell biopic, which is obviously Priscilla Presley probably had a bit of a shit time. And
unfortunately
Elvis was magnetic and a bit of an asshole. That's so obvious.
Yeah,
that's not that. I'm hearing this for the first time.
Exactly, and unfortunately, it probably by dint of it being kind of sponsored or executive produced rather by its subject, it doesn't really give its central character much in the way of like contradiction or complexity. Not that I would like it to be some kind of victim blaming thing, but I mean, there's got to be more going on there than what we see in, albeit a very capable and compelling central performance from Kaylee Spaney. But essentially, the script doesn't really give her much room to move, other than she fancies this really famous charismatic guy who actually isn't charismatic in the film.
I feel like
crisis of IP. It's a crisis of IP film. It's a film about something you already know about that you'll go and see.
We know very recently because Baz Luhrmann made an odd biopic of Elvis not that long ago, literally just last year or the year before last, which was inhabiting the idea of the excessiveness of pop was actually a great film. I thought it was really good.
I haven't seen it, but yeah.
I thought it was excellent.
I'll take your word for
maybe, I don't know if it's Baz Luhrmann's best, maybe it is. It was just, it inhabited the kind of strange hypnagogic space of stardom and the effect of stardom in a really interesting way. Editorially, I really liked it.
I probably won't watch it, but
no, you probably won't. But I think you'd prefer. I think
I would like. Definitely.
I think if it was like an even race between the two, I think you would. You would see a lot more meat on the bones.
There was very little to like about Priscilla.
Yeah,
but it passed the time.
Just passed the time.
Just about, I mean, it didn't pass the time. I was like waiting for it to end. But anyway, Monster. Should we talk about Everybody Knows I'm a Motherfucking Monster?
Monster. What's that coming over the hill? It's Monster
Kore-eda's new film.
Hirokazu Kore-eda.
Monster.
So Monster is, following on from, last year's Broker. The thing is Kore-eda is really like the big daddy of sentimental filmmaking. He makes often very beguiling, very beautiful, sentimental films, have often quite tidy. They explore, ambiguous subject matter, but tend to have tidy endings. That's his thing. He's stock in trade. He does it very well. But they can leave something to be desired. There's not something quite right about them. They're quite manipulative and programmatic. Monster is an exploration of bullying, of shame and guilt and power, and all of these things. So it centers on a narrative around a young boy in a school with a single mum raising him, and this young boy has a friend at the school, and this young boy is accused of bullying this other guy, and their class teacher, Mr. Hito. Is it Hiro? Hiro. I missaid Hirohito. It's not. It's Hiro. Hiro. So Mr. Hiro is accused of HIRO is accused of sort of like abusing or bullying the young kid, and it kind of explores the ramifications of this.
And there's quite an amazing Kafkaesque scene where the mother, very understandably perturbed by her son's recent odd behavior,
it's very defensive.
Goes and meets the head teacher, who has this strange robotic quality in the way that she
reverts the script.
Yeah, in the way that she responds to the pleas of the mother. But basically, in the opening, you're really none the wiser as to whose fault it is, but you have a few clues, which then, in these subsequent retellings of
we get
the
sort
story,
of three
we
narratives.
get different accounts, and it's not quite Rashomon where they are completely biased. They're all revealed to be biased accounts that tell a different chain of events.
At the end of Rashomon, there is no authoritative account.
Whereas these films they're not even from particular perspectives, but they sort of concertina between different perspectives. They're
from different segments of time. They show us different
moments.
Of time.
Exactly. And they kind of illuminate different bits of the story, so that you kind of have a better idea once you've watched all three of them what happened. But to me, it felt a bit cheap, because it was like it felt like I was being kind of purposefully, for the fun of it, I was just having like information about what was happening withdrawn and then shown to me in an inconvenient or an unreasonable time. Why did I have to wait like 40 minutes to find out that something else actually happened afterwards that recontextualizes the thing I just saw, but in this second iteration of how the story is told, just so that I can go, that's interesting.
It's a highly faceted narrative in a lot of ways. So it's, then this is a buzzword at the moment, but it's highly baroque in terms of its structure. It reveals itself as a kind of polyvocal film later on. It's sort of surprising to suddenly get this. It does the first
run of the story, and then it just restarts. It starts with a fight with this massive building that has a strip club in it on fire. And
I thought it was great, the evocation.
Yeah, that bit's pretty good.
It really is quite.
And then it
sublime.
goes again with the fire. Like, so the story's resetting when you see the fire, the building on fire again.
Yeah, and I think so. At times it was very sublime in its framing and composition, very beautiful. It has. Kore-eda has a real sensitiveness to these kind of excisions or these fragments of scenes that he pulls away in the way that Bresson would shoot a hand or a gesture. Kore-eda can be very good at alighting on a detail that might feel isn't necessarily narratively momentous, but he'll pull away and reflect on some leaves blowing on the ground, or he'll reflect on a drop of blood falling from somebody's nose. Decision to leave. And actually it was not that dissimilar from the kind of fractured narrative structure, compositional structure of Decision to Leave, Park Chan-wook. But yeah, so we get these. He's got this great eye for these moments of sublime focus on particular things that aren't necessarily narratively important. They're just kind of emotively resonant. They're like little tuning forks that he scatters throughout the film. He's very good at that. So it looks nice, and it had beautiful sound design. But I think my problem with it felt quite emotionally manipulative.
Right.
It felt very synthetically tidy, because at the end it wanted us to know that actually the two boys are actually really good friends by the end, and everyone's happy, and the teachers, his reputation's kind of been saved a bit.
I spoke to someone in the foyer who interpreted that as them dying and then going to heaven, but
that's bullshit.
That doesn't seem true.
I
dissuaded this woman of her delusion.
Completely incorrect. Yeah, wrong.
Sometimes I'm wrong about plots, so I
I think that's the wrong thing. I think there's this kind of rebirth moment because there's a big storm basically, and they get out of the storm. That's it. It's just a storm. It's just this pathetic moment of pathetic fallacy.
I mean, he is good at pathetic fallacy generally. I mean, the moment or just like metaphors that make you feel stuff. There is this moment where she says he sort of basically this I don't like so much. He's in this like Lucas Dont close way, kind of like confesses his like boy on boy love.
There's a sort of nascent adolescent sexy thing between them,
and sexy, then just romantic, really.
Romantic, that's it,
not even erotic, really. Just like they love being together. And then she's like, if you have a feeling, blow it away. And she reveals that she's the head teacher who has hitherto been a very cold and icy woman. And we learn has maybe like accidentally run over her child, but her husband's taking the rap for it. Very interesting. But she basically says, if you have a difficult feeling, like blow it away, like blow it into the trumpet. And then she like teaches him how to play trombone or trumpet or something. And then they make these like kind of haunting discordant noises that sound a bit like maybe Mika Levy's suddenly taken over the soundtrack. And it's much better than all the sentimental Ryoichi Sakamoto.
It is literally Ryoichi Sakamoto. I wonder if it was one of his last acts before he died was to make this.
Probably, yeah. I mean, maybe he also was in charge of that composition, but anyway.
I think he must have been in charge of the whole composition because that feels like that.
But it's so different from the plinky plonky sentimental.
Yeah, because we get other parts
to feel sad now music.
Yeah, we get other parts of the film where someone's reflecting and they feel bad, so we get this kind of uplifting of ding, 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 ding. We get the piano coming in. It's like let the actor and the composition give me that. That don't, it's too programmatic. It's shoving you. It's going, oh, this is sad, and you're supposed to be feeling something right now.
But look, Broker was good. I mean, but it's funny you say this about.
I found this better, if only because the stakes are more interesting. Because the experience of when you're a child or an adolescent, you go through these experiences which you gradually. Your emotional life world and your ethical life world is expanding as you grow, and you encounter situations which are complicated and difficult and you don't know how to do it. So kids often go silent, or they lie, or they hide, and it can be very difficult for parents and very stressful for parents, I imagine, to kind of unpick the truth. So
yes, it all started really well. It all started well, illuminating
exploring those ambiguities in the school setting, and I think there's an amazing scene actually, and it's very good satire at times as well about politeness and saving face. About when the mum goes to confront the school board very hysterically, and in a I suppose properly Japanese way, they kind of close ranks and act very deferential.
Not being hysterical. I mean, I suppose she is,
but in the context of Japanese, sort of reserve and politeness, she is, and she's kind of overstepping, and the blocking in that scene is fantastic because they're all bowing to her, and we see her face kind of through these bowed bodies. It's very tight. It's very close.
But it is meant. This isn't just a Japanese culture thing. They are meant to seem like icy, right?
Yeah, they're supposed to seem excessively icy and unapologetic. Because they're kind of there's reasons why they don't want to accuse her son of basically of bullying. And there's reasons there they don't want to admit that maybe something's not going up well with the teaching at the school because they don't want to basically get told off by the big school board, basically. So they're kind of, protecting their own. And so it's very good at I thought that the actual kind of stakes and the kind of raw meat of the film is quite an interesting space. And it's something we saw with, Lucas Dont's Close was quite good at exploring those kind of the ambivalence and strangeness of adolescence, and it's something Laura Waddell did even better with Playground.
Yes,
which I think is the best version of this film because we're seeing a lot of dementia films at the moment. We're seeing a lot of bullying and childhood films at the moment. We're getting these two things. We're not getting so much middle life. We're getting a lot of youth, and we're getting a lot of
polarization. That's what they say about porn. It's all about the MILFs and the MILFs and the teens. We're not getting anything in between.
But I think this is it, and I think there was something about I think Laura Waddell with Playground did it particularly well because formally it was the most interesting because it was shot entirely from a children's perspective. It was really ambiguous. It was painful. You felt the pain of these children. This film was it wanted to have a neatly tied, wrapped bow at the end of the film and to kind of say, oh, everything's kind of all right. And that's Kore-eda's thing. I just don't think it makes for great cinema. I think if a great cinema is allowing that to hang in the air.
And it's weird as well that his career, I watched Afterlife, which I had never seen before. His
really good film.
Second feature film. and I had seen Malborosi, and I remember that being quite like a bit like not as conventional as these recent films. Although this has an unconventional narrative structure, it's shot and kind of played out in a fairly conventional way. And yeah, I just thought, wow, Afterlife is such an extraordinary novel device. It's like deeply weird, but
has
like
a kind of
very compelling.
Nathan Fieldery.
It's basically a proto Nathan Fielder. Afterlife by Kore-eda. You definitely watch it if you haven't. But it's weird that he sort of doesn't really do stuff like that anymore. Broker I really liked as a kind of like conventionally shot, thoughtful narrative that I would have thought could do as well as Parasite. Of course, it didn't.
It was.
I was very happy with that film. And I'm glad he was more bold in some ways with this film, but it didn't come off. So yeah,
I think it will distribute in the UK. I can imagine.
Yeah, Picturehouse, so that'll be fine.
Yeah. But I think people will see it. It's good. Like honestly, like it's still very beautiful and often quite sublime and quite ambiguous. I think it just fails to realize the real emotional ambiguities and resonances of the topic it's exploring. It's too deferential ultimately to niceness and to narrative cohesion at the end, whereas I think it could have been a lot more strange and thorny. And
the moments when it was strange and thorny, like, proved that, I think.
He can do it. He can go there. Yeah. He just won't, because he's like I said at the beginning. This is his stock in trade really now, is doing neatly tied packages. But if you, I said this before we went to see it. It's Kore-eda is always like now a kind of nice belly rub in a film festival. Like it's quite pleasant to watch. Like
it'll be 2 hours. Yeah. It'll have some humanity to it, and you'll.
So it's very cute.
If you want to, you can feel something.
Yeah, if you want.
Speaking of sublimity, we have one more film to discuss, which we just saw today.
It's fresh.
It's fresh. It was a very long film. It was 3 hours and 2 minutes, I believe. Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell by
Tien An, but I can't remember his first name.
Okay.
Tien An is his surname. His debut film by a guy who's actually I believe a graphic novelist and now filmmaker. What's his first name? Don't embarrass me. It's Tien An.
Tien An.
Fam. Yeah, Fam.
Yeah, right. What are you saying, Fam?
What you say, Fam?
It's PH is Fam.
Fam. Yeah, I think it's Fam Tien An. It's a debut film. And I think the kind of things you pick up about this on the grapevine before you see it is you're like, and I'm not just saying this because of the region of the world it's from, but it is Pitchapong Virasethical coded film. You also with these kind of with slow cinema, you're thinking of Simon Lang, you're thinking of Lav Diaz, you're thinking of a particular modality of filmmaking.
Thinking of Began as well. That
Began,
director of Kylie Blues did spring to mind,
and also
particularly the length of the camera. There were these shots that really sort of like got attached to things and then moved off. He did try. I mean, should we just give the scenario? It's a very interesting scenario. It starts off at this kind of this bar where people are watching football, and then off screen, these 3 guys are sort of pontificating about God and faith,
simplicity and spirituality.
Exactly. Yeah. Having what I felt was quite a basic conversation, but it kind of I was happy with the basicness at that stage because it was letting us in on the character. Off screen, which we then turn to slowly in a very interesting pan, is a crash between 2 mopeds. In which we later learn there's been a fatality and some injuries. And then we learn that the people who were in this crash were actually related to one of the
guy that's saying on the left hand.
Yeah. It was actually his nephew and his sister-in-law, who were in the crash. So then he has this journey to transport the body over to somewhere very far away where this woman's from, the sister-in-law.
His hometown, basically.
His hometown.
Yeah, in the mountains of Vietnam.
And then the rest of the film takes place not in the city, not in Saigon, but in the mountains. We mostly watch him take the kid around, and then
he becomes the ward for a short time of her son. The rest of the family, we understand, is migrated to America, and her former husband, who she's separated from, is kind of absentee. Nobody really knows where he is.
So this guy, the uncle, has to basically Tien, who's also the name of the director, has to explain death and faith and various difficult sort of issues just to this child one-on-one. And then later on, the girlfriend of or the love interest of Tien kind of appears, and
she's now a nun,
and
she's had a spirit. She's realised her spiritual journey.
Nun. Yeah.
That's the same person.
Oh, and then
that's a flashback. Yeah.
Flashback. Okay. I didn't really cotton on.
Yeah, it's a little bit. So it's a little bit.
Elements here.
There's with this film. I think one of the interesting things about, I'm talking about someone else now, but Picture Film Verus Ethical, is we're looking at a world in which the spirit world and the world of reality are intrinsically bound together. But much of the mise en scène of Verus Ethical is quite banal. It's plastic chairs sitting outside, decking. It's people boiling rice. It's copper kettles. It's all this kind of ordinary stuff. And then you get these kind of slow emergences of the sublime, of the spirit world into the world of the living. I think with this film, it does that, and it often does it to great in a great register and great key and very powerfully, but maybe it does them a little bit too clumsily. So it shows us moments where he's going on a spiritual journey. Basically, he meets various characters, some of whom might be real, some of who are ghosts, in the sense of he has this kind of flashback to this meeting with this girl before she became a nun and before he left for Saigon, where he looks like his age now, but she looks a bit younger. He meets a sort of Vietnam War veteran in this shack, and there's lots of these great these monologues.
This is maybe one of the longest shots. It goes to
really
various different
good,
locations and really drifts. Yeah, it's really nice.
There's an encounter with an old woman who's sort of got this soothsayery vibe about her. There's lots of moments where, as he's going on this journey, once he's kind of done the business of the funeral, and the funeral is like ethnographically really well captured. There's like a Highland Vietnamese funeral. It's really well explored, and this kind of syncretic kind of mixture of like all this adaptation of Catholicism in this kind of particularly Vietnamese way. That's very cool. It slaps. It's really good. And then we get these kind of little suggestions that we're in this liminal space now. And, there's lots of like Tarkovskian veils blowing in windows and the camera panning slowly outside, and color matching. And then there's lots of moments where Tien is suddenly being woken up rudely by someone. He's been asleep, and we're like, oh, was the scene we just saw a dream? Is it real?
My worry is almost that it was at its best when it was being derivative. But I could feel a certain almost recognizable, Tien and style coming through. But then I wondered whether it wasn't just reminding me of other directors that
he's like this kind of perfect smorgasbord in a way, because he's like, one thing Verus Ethical has is like Verus Ethical isn't very interested in, I suppose, increasingly kind of youth culture, whereas we get a bit more of like young lads they go to a kind of sexy spa where he gets a bit of a handy on the table. We get
just before we get there, this is so good, this bit.
I love
where
that,
he's sort of this erotic masseuse thing happening, and then he gets an emergency phone call, and he has to be reminded twice to actually check the phone, because obviously it's hugely important. Relates to his sister-in-law, who we just sort of saw it before. That whole bit, that was all really going
when
really
it was
well.
in Saigon, it was perfect.
Very
exciting. It kind of stumbled on its entry into the spirit world. It kind of tripped over the door, I think, over the door frame a little bit. And it was like, because everything was possible, it didn't really know what was permissible.
Yeah, and I felt like the spiritual element was mostly being communicated through rather sort of bold, but rather kind of obvious sound design fluctuations. I mean, there are amazing sort of bits where like it like rains and then stops raining, and then you see these like little butterflies or flies in the light. There are some shots that are totally magical and unimpeachable, really. But yeah, I was clock watching a lot in the final hour. I just wasn't.
There's a point where I thought, wow, I was like, yeah, I'm like, we must be there now. When I looked down, I was like, wow, we've got the whole hour left to go. And I was like, the film doesn't...
We've all been there, guys.
Yeah, we've all been there. I think 2 hours in, the film doesn't really go anywhere more interesting. It just repeats this kind of, is it a dream? Is it real? Kind of narrative in a way that, remember the best thing that someone like Verosetical does is with, say, Uncle Boon Me, is when we get the emergence of the ghost at the table.
Yeah.
Like this great, and it's so tense, and it's really one of the greatest scenes of the 21st century on film. It's absolutely unimpeachable, incredible moment of the interbleeding of the banal and the spiritual and the sublime. And here it's kind of like this pick and mix of, and here's another kind of cool sublime thing that I'm doing, and here's another one. It was a bit too much of a buffet of like significant, metaphorically significant moments. And I think they were all great. They were all like really, really beautifully shot, and they were really, really lovely, and there was a real heart to all of them. But it didn't hang together really as like a coherent, even if you go into the kind of strange labyrinth of the spirit world, it can still feel coherent. I think about like the Taste of Green Papaya or whatever, like films like that.
Scent of the Green Papaya.
Scent of Green Papaya, which kind of can do stuff like this and have this kind of coherence even through incoherence. Or Simon Lang does it really well with Goodbye Dragon Inn, this strange liminal space of this cinema
what it is
unfolding, and it feels sensory. Weird, but it feels kind of like the architecture of the dream is coherent.
Part of achieving that sensory effect, I think, is a bit of refinement. Goodbye Dragon Inn is a great thing to reference. In fact, lots of Simon Lang is good to reference because he's good at pulling back and isolating particular feelings and things. And actually, weirdly, I think some of these frames almost felt too busy, even though it was very slow and, but it just didn't quite know what it was looking at. I think there's something beautiful about Verosetical, although I'm always have to admit in these conversations I'm not as keen on Verosetical as most people whose opinion I respect are. He's not really. I much prefer Simon Lang. But just to go to Tarkovsky, who's the second most kind of, or maybe the first most visible influence in this film. I think what's great about Tarkovsky is he observes things in such a deliberate way, and he notices the thing that you want to look at in every scene and allows you to look at it, and it's not a thing that can really be put into words, and it'll just be, and then he's bold enough, like all great artists, when something really works, he's bold enough to double down and do it really heavily. So like, there's that scene in Mirror where like there's like a bit of condensation on a sort of teak table, and it kind of evaporates in almost exact but not quite synchronicity with a kind of is it Ligeti or some kind of like orchestral, like sort of experimental orchestral climax, or just all the moments where like a glass breaks and a bird comes out. These moments that are very, very deliberate, and they always let us look at the thing we most want to look at, but they don't sort of ram our heads with it, but they know that that's what we want to see.
Yeah.
Didn't get that in this film. It felt sometimes just a bit like, especially with the cinematography, which, because he was trying to do this elaborate thing where the camera was still and then moving again and still, and following the characters clearly too quite difficult to follow scenes. You could see that the frame was just being cropped in a bit sometimes in order to manage maybe extraneous things being in shot, or like a bit of camera shake that might have been corrected.
It was good when it was
a bit clumsy, It
was good when it was obviously it's most controlled, like this opening scene where we have it's a scene of 3/3. We have this football game and this mascot who suddenly breaks away from spectating the game to go and stop trying to hand out flyers or something. And that's when we're introduced to these three characters having this kind of lazy, like, I think the point is they're having a really kind of shallow conversation about spirituality because they haven't gone on this journey yet. They don't really know what they're talking about, but they're kind of pontificating about the spirit world and about faith. And then the camera pans to this accident, and that so poised and good. And it tries to do it later with this kind of panning, and sometimes it felt a bit messy and unnecessary. Through the hospital ward and things like that, and it's so I think it was like, there's a very famous anthropology book called Forest of Symbols about this society that is founded on almost like in a kind of almost is ODing itself on symbology basically. And so there's this sense where it was almost kind of going too hard. So we get where Tarkovsky will give us a bird, we get a little chick, and then we get some ducks, and then we got some roosters, and then we get another bird that flies in. Then we've got the funeral, and there's suddenly a bird that flies into the funeral, and we get the bird, and he's like, okay, the bird's a symbol, I'm going to keep doing it. So it kind of spams the copy and paste on some of these symbols a bit too much.
It's a very nice scene with some chickens, but I still don't quite like.
Yeah, it was just a bit too much.
It doesn't have the raw sense of purpose that Tarkovsky's chicken bit in Mirror has.
Yeah, so in my head, and one thing that was kind of spinning around in my head, it was like, and I didn't know if this was a deliberate strategy, is like for a long time, the moments that seemed keyed into being subliminal almost didn't reach that. It's like, are they sort of failing intentionally as sublime moments, because everything's there to make you think that I'm seeing the face of God, but you weren't quite seeing it. And was it like, and part of me was like, in a generous reading, I was like, maybe he's making his point. There's this scene which is a literal recreation of a scene from Solaris, when we see the river with the kind of reeds floating in it, and it's like, it's so overdetermined, that image, that it's got to be intentional, and he's not thinking, this is as good as Tarkovsky. He's thinking, I'm reminding you of another thing.
I hope it's not sort of Tarantino sample culture.
Yeah, I didn't recognize any of the shots in that film really, though. I think that there was, and I kind of wondered if he was allowing these things to kind of fail just on the cusp of reaching there, because it's a guy who's on a journey. He's not completed the spiritual journey. And so I thought maybe that was a clever thing he's doing, where he's kind of allowing these scenes to fail on the cusp of sublimity almost. And he's actually not showing us the spirit world at all. He's showing us all these things that kind of shallowly, in the world of the superficial, gesture towards it. Because, one of the things that, what is a film called Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell? And when Tien Ans talks about the film, he said the cocoon shell is like a Vietnamese like idiom about like being trapped in the superficial world of sort of celebrity or being an influencer.
It's like a Matrix thing.
Yeah, or you might say like someone who's just obsessed with being an influencer in Saigon, right? It's like, in the cocoon shell. So are we seeing the film from within
the sunken place?
In the sunken place, yeah. Are we seeing the whole film from within the cocoon shell? Someone who's trying to escape the world of banal appearance, and
it doesn't quite achieve that noble aim. Because I'm very into. I think Petzold is quite good at it. In The Fire, for instance, it kind of looking at the feel of not to feel it, as a poet once said.
Yeah. He's really sparing the Petzold. I think, I feel really generous and warm towards this film. I just feel like you said, in the loos afterwards, you're like, his second film is going to bang. Like,
don't share the things that I said to you.
Sorry. You said, don't scream. That's one thing you said. But I think one of the, so there's, I think he will probably refine this method. Whereas the funny thing is, he's kind of gone at it from the other end of the wedge, because when you look at someone like Verius Ethical starts off actually in a really mysterious object at noon. It was actually a really restrained, really restrained film, and Bill adds all the stuff, and
he plays with too many toys, I think, on his debut. But
he's got such a rich heritage, like a rich and recent heritage of slow cinema.
I think this film is struggling to get distribution, and I think it should be distributed. But I wouldn't envy someone who was trying to get it into cinemas.
It's a hard sell to get this into Picturehouse, a 3-hour, quite contemplative film that's very beautiful and difficult.
But it won the Camera d'Or. It was. I think that there should be some law where the film that wins the award for camera at Cannes gets distributed in the UK
automatically.
Somehow. I don't know what mechanism. Maybe we need a planned economy.
I feel like this will show like Curzon and maybe the ICA.
Well, it won't show if it doesn't get distribution.
It must. It'll get distribution surely.
It might not.
It's a shame.
There's only how many distributors? Curzon doesn't really buy this kind of thing now, but Curzon doesn't just have.
I don't mean them being the distributor, but someone will distribute it. And imagine a screening at.
If Picturehouse haven't picked up, and then there's that thing, New Wave Films. They tend to pick up things. There's this thing. What's it called? The one that picked up Do Not Expect Too Much of the End of the World.
Oh, the Rowdy Jude.
But again, it doesn't quite fall into the right space.
It's not tied enough. The only way it would happen is if people make enough shouts about it being basically like for a Picturehouse Verius Ethical, which I don't think is reasonable.
Even our praise of it is not really fulsome enough to guarantee. Not that we have that much influence, but it's like I don't think that many people are going to love it enough.
No,
to really get
I'm glad it's
but that's fine. He'll make a better film, hopefully, and then that film will do well.
But I did really like it.
Yeah,
of all the films I've seen so far, I think it was, maybe maybe the most interesting. And I think Breillat was the most interesting, actually. I think this was the most kind of...
True, out of the films
this one matched the idea I have of what a really good art house film
out of the
films
films
should be.
Out of the films we discussed, I guess I'm most impressed by this one. And, well, yeah, I did see Memory by Michel Franco, which I was quite keen on. So we'll discuss that
next time
when Georgia and Owen have seen it. But, yeah. Also the Breillat, good. But flawed. Flawed but good is very much a theme. But I think we're feeling quite positive and charitable.
We've got Glazer, we've got Victor Richet's first film in like 800 years.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of like big hitters that are about to land for us over the next 2 weeks.
I'm going to be seeing tomorrow. So quite a lot to look forward to. We're going to talk about Michel Franco in more depth as well because of his new film Memory. And that is going to do it for our first report from London Film Festival 2023.
Over and out. Thank you for watching and listening. Or both.
See you later.
Bye.